Welcome everybody to this Monday, I guess still technically late afternoon, extreme weather and wildfire briefing update. I guess as I'm calling it, to distinguish it from my more typical scheduled office hours under less extreme circumstances. Of course, a day with absolutely nothing of national significance occurring anywhere in the country, as we all know. Um, but there's plenty going on, I think, to talk about locally in Southern California with respect to the pretty extreme, frankly, wind event that may unfold tonight, and more importantly, the associated fire weather threat, which will be genuinely extreme once again as we go into tonight. So it's getting there now. It will be worse later tonight into tomorrow morning, and then expand to relatively extreme levels further south tomorrow. So currently really blowing in a number of places, but the overnight risk will be highest in LA County. Then tomorrow, the extremely critical risk, expanding into portions of San Bernardino, Orange, and San Diego counties as well. And that is a part of the state that has not seen significant fire activity yet. During this long, unprecedented winter episode. So that is of particular concern, not just LA and Ventura counties tonight, but then other portions of Southern California tomorrow, where these places have not seen such extreme risk yet. So I think I wanted to start by just summarizing again what's going on. It still hasn't rained, of course, in Southern California. And so vegetation continues to get even drier. There was a brief several-day interlude of low winds and higher humidity that may have brought up the fuel moisture in the rapidly responding dead grasses a little bit, but that's already poofed into the ether. As the moment the winds picked up, that moisture is out of there. And tonight there will be very strong Santa Ana winds. In fact, these are going to be strong enough they may cause some damage locally in their own right, even if there are no fires, once again. And there is a chance of mountain wave activity. As I mentioned, this is the kind of phenomenon that brought very strong wind gusts of 70 to 90 miles an hour in both the San Fernando and San Gabriel valleys. So really the whole region immediately downwind of the San Gabriel Mountains during the original event on January 7th and 8th that was so destructive. So we don't expect winds quite as extreme as that one, but they may get close in some areas and possibly in different areas, and this is very important, than experience them during that event. So it is possible that the very windiest mountaintops could gust to 100 miles an hour again. That's actually not as unusual as getting the more widespread 60 or 70 miles an hour at lower elevations, which is actually what I'm more concerned about than the 100 mile an hour gusts on the mountaintops, because for better or for worse, the mountaintops are used to it, and the infrastructure up there is used to it as well. Not necessarily the case at the lower elevation places that we'll see some 60 to 70 plus mile an hour gusts again tonight, and the new areas that will see those gusts that did not see them earlier this month during the event. So right now, what we're looking at is not only those strong winds overnight into tomorrow, gradually tapering off thereafter for the rest of the week, but maybe with a secondary surge not as strong once again on Thursday. So this will be another long duration event. The humidity of the air itself will be much lower this time around than during the January 7th or 8th event. So while the winds won't be quite as extreme in most places, the humidity will actually be worse this time in the sense that it will be even drier. I mean, really just about as dry as you can get. Some places ending up as low as 0 to 5% relative humidity, but we'll get it pretty close to as close to zero as is practically possible in some places in the coming hours and days. And so that really is going to add another layer to this beyond just the winds, and it will also mean that in addition to the wind-driven component of spread, fires that break out really anywhere, even places that aren't seeing very strong winds, will be conditioned to spread pretty aggressively. Not as quickly as the wind-driven fires, but they will burn very aggressively and have faster rates of spread simply by virtue of how profound drying effect that atmosphere is going to have on the vegetation and the pre-drying effect of any flames that occur. So really, we're going to be kind of at the mercy of ignitions over the next 48 hours especially. Hopefully there won't be too many, although there have been a number of them, as folks are commenting in the chat today already. None of them have gotten out of hand. As far as I can tell at this point, none of them are continuing to spread unchecked, so we could call these a lot of good stops by the pre-positioned resources so far. However, conditions aren't as dire as they'll be later tonight into tomorrow morning, and also we had the benefit of extensive air support. Tiny little fires being hit by dozens of retardant and water drops, because we can and probably should be doing that under these conditions. We were able to do that until the sunset hours today. That will not be the case overnight. So we will lose that benefit in the overnight hours, and that is one of the concerns. So not only will the weather be worse in the middle of the night than it was today, we also won't be able to hit anything that pops up as quickly or as aggressively with air resources in all likelihood. So it may be another long night for a lot of people once again, and then tomorrow too is going to be a tough day, I think, especially the first half of the day, including in some places farther south. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen a fair bit today, and then also talk a lot about the weather, which is better when I'm sharing my screen, so I'll do that now. So just to double check the status update, just to show people where the fires have been, as several folks have mentioned, there was a Ted Williams fire. That one did have potential. It burned a few acres of pretty heavy brush, but again, a very aggressive initial attack with aircraft and ground crews appear to have got under control. Again, when things get really windy later, there's not a 100% guarantee that they stay under control, but generally speaking, fire crews are aware of that, and there's usually at least one crew or one engine staying on site at all of these fires, even if they're small, even if it looks like they're fully extinguished, precisely for the reason of there's a fear of rekindles, and so that's something that fire crews are acutely aware of and trying to prevent, even though the risk is not zero. So there was the Ted Williams fire, which had some potential and ultimately was a catch. There was the Pico fire, also had some potential and was caught. There's the Griffith fire, which was burning in Griffith Park itself within LA. That too could have been pretty bad if it had happened later tonight. But again, it didn't. It was caught. And then the last one I'm aware of at this point was the Harbor Fire. This is not far from the ocean. It burns some of the vegetation near McGrath State Beach. Again, not a lot of structures out there. None of these at this point appear to be spreading further at this time, and there are no other new fires that have popped up yet. I checked the satellite imagery, always another good check. And again, we can see the recent burn areas on satellite because they have, during the daylight hours, they're absorbing more solar energy, and so the surface gets warmer. So we can see that's where whoops, that's not the tool I want. I want this tool. We can see where the former the Palisades fire footprint. Again, it's not actively burning. That's just because the ground is darker after it got burned. This is the Eaton fire. That's the Bridge fire from September. This is the Line fire from September. The Airport fire. So you can see all of these burn areas. Keep this in your back pocket. We're going to talk more about why this matters, even for the fires that are no longer burning, a little bit later in the session. So keep in mind all of those circled areas. But the other thing I want to show, bring back the visible satellite. If you look closely at the area to the west of LA County, what you can see is what looks like some smoke in this area here. So you see that sort of poofing offshore. Well, I don't think that is smoke, actually. I'm pretty sure this is ash from the Palisades fire here. So I think this is actually a large cloud of residual ash that's blowing offshore, and you can see some additional ash down here, potentially from the Eaton fire zone. This is an indication that the offshore winds are really kicking into high gear, and that the winds have now gotten strong enough to start lofting that debris and that ash. Some of that ash, unfortunately, is something you don't want to be breathing. There's been concern about toxological contamination, especially given how many structures and vehicles and hazardous materials burned. And so if you're in a place that's visibly ashy or dusty right now, it's a good time to wear a mask or stay inside. Unfortunately, until it rains significantly, we are going to see potentially hazardous ash blowing around downwind of fire areas. And in this case, unfortunately, most of the fire areas are immediately upwind of the major conurbation of central LA and then the San Fernando Valley, the San Gabriel, everywhere where people live in Southern California is downwind of some of these fires right now. So, in fact, actually, if you look really closely, you can actually see a little poof of ash right off of the Eaton fire in that circle too. In the last couple frames, I'll let the thing fade away and you can see that popping up as well. So there is ash blowing around. You may see it. Don't freak out too much yet. I think that's not new smoke. That's actually ash from the existing fires blowing around. So this is the current outlook from the Storms Prediction Center for today, and by today it really means tonight. So the primary focus of the risk is up in this purple extremely critical zone here. This includes most of the San Fernando Valley, all of the San Gabriel Mountains and adjacent mountains, pretty much the whole I-5 corridor going up from LA to the Grapevine, a lot of western LA counties, so again, including Malibu and the Santa Monica Mountains, but also extending much farther into Ventura County, so Oxnard and Ojai, eastern Ventura County potentially at significant risk tonight. This is a classic sort of risk setup for this zone, and vegetation has now reached record dry, I repeat, record dry levels for the time of year, which is saying something. We are now into unprecedented territory with the rainy season still being a no-show as of January 20th. And then I want to extend this map. This is for today into tonight and then for tomorrow. So after midnight through about noon tomorrow, we actually see that the risk area contracts slightly up here, but still remains across most of the area. But now look at this new purple region down here, mainly San Diego and adjacent regions here, interior portions of San Diego County, I should say. So really in the San Diego County mountains, and as we get north all the way up into portions of San Bernardino County too. So this is not a threat only confined to this Santa Ana wind region as we saw during the previous January 7th, 8th event, but now extending in the overnight hours into tomorrow, farther south and east. This zone was not classified as extremely critical, if I recall, during the 7th and 8th event, and we did not see any disastrous fires there. So this does leave me significantly more concerned about this region this time around. In addition, of course, to this region here, this is a really large area cumulatively of extremely critical risk. I mean, that's not a small region at all. In fact, the number of people who live within 10 miles of these purple zones is in the high millions. So again, we're kind of at the mercy of ignitions. I hope there aren't too many overnight because it's going to be much harder to stop anything that ignites in the overnight hours versus the ones during the daytime, both because conditions will be worse and because we won't have that air support available to the same extent. So I'm going to bring this back, leave it on the shortwave infrared so it'll be immediately obvious to me if any new fires pop up. We'll keep this open. It looks like there actually is a new fire on watch duty, so let's zoom in and take a look. This is not in a great place. This is right in that zone, right along the 118 freeway, near the junction with 14, sort of in this open space. Let's bring up the satellite map so we can kind of see and I'm going to get rid of the red flag warning so we can see the vegetation better. I just realized I'm not logged in to watch duty account, but that's okay for this purpose. Okay, so this may be kind of hemmed in by the freeway. Let's see what the description is. Moving uphill, so not clear. I mean, this is one of those situations where normally this is probably in the brush, I don't know, somewhere off the side of the freeway. Normally this wouldn't be too much of a concern because it's kind of hemmed in by structures, but if you can see, if you have strong winds from east to west and this gets into the vegetation, it's patchy here, but it could potentially threaten structures. So we'll see. I don't know how strong the winds are yet in this area. I'd be more concerned with fires popping up in the mountains, of course, but we'll see what happens with this one. Let's see if there's any cameras in the area. I need to get the cameras back up. Let's get those lined up, see if we can see what it looks like. Maybe from this camera. Okay, there we go. Well, you can see it. There is a fire. Let's go to the last 5 minutes here, so we're not just looking at it nowhere. Okay, so you can see it. It looks like it is a little bit in alignment, maybe with some wind, although the winds are not so strong that it's blowing this plume in a very contiguous direction. So you can see the camera bouncing around, but of course this camera, remember, is up in the mountains at a much higher elevation. The winds may not be making it down to the surface yet, so hopefully this will be another good catch rather than one that ignites at night. But I guess my concern is this: we're sort of seeing a rate of ignitions of one every hour or so, roughly, throughout the day to day. If that continues into the night, the likelihood that at least one of these, does something that we don't want it to do is going to be increasing. And so this one is one to keep an eye on. It does look like it's not contained. It is actively burning, and there are strong winds at least above the surface, above this fire right now. Let's see if there's any closer cameras potentially. I'm not really seeing anything closer right now. Maybe, possibly this one. Nope, and maybe this one, actually. Let's just see. Nope, it looks like this is the only camera on it right now, so we'll keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on it. Okay. I'm going to check the comments really quick. Okay, nothing urgent right now. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on this, and actually let me just okay, so here's the evidence. So it looks like it is burning mainly in very light grass for now. That's a photograph of what it looks like. We'll keep an eye on it. Okay, so I wanted to show a couple things. Here's where we are now. What we have is a really deep trough with a major Arctic outbreak across the US. In fact, what I'm actually going to do is, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to just take a brief aside to zoom in on a different part of the US, the southeastern US, because there is a potentially historic weather event occurring there right now. So here's where we are. Let's bring us back up to the present. Here's where we are now. Notice, take a look at what's going on the far left of the screen, and for orientation, this is Houston, Texas, right? Well, I guess it's probably not the right color. That's Houston, Texas, right there. So that's Galveston Bay. Look at the precipitation type. Just for orienteering people, this is Houston, and then this here is New Orleans. And watch what happens over the next 24 hours. A pretty significant snow event all the way down to the beaches of the Gulf Coast. So there could even be accumulating snow on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico in Houston. Certainly in New Orleans. This has only happened a few times in the historical record. It's not completely unprecedented. It does happen when conditions are extremely favorable, when there's a very deep Arctic air mass making it unusually far to the south, but it hasn't happened in living memory in a lot of these places. So we're talking about significant accumulating snowfall all the way to the coast in southeast Texas and South Louisiana, even down into the bayous, believe it or not, South Alabama, South Mississippi, and even parts of the panhandle of Florida will probably see accumulating snowfall from this very unusual winter storm. Of course, snow up along the eastern seaboard, but that's not nearly so unusual. So potentially, and don't take this too literally, but there could be at least a few inches of snow accumulating in these regions, which is definitely a historically notable weather event. Going back to the western U.S., I wanted to illustrate that for context. What we see right now is this deep, deep trough over the central U.S. with cold Arctic air diving southward. This is why there's snow occurring on the Gulf Coast later tonight. And this is also why we're getting a strong offshore wind event in California. We have this very cold air mass over the western U.S., here in Colorado, it's been below zero the last couple of days, below 0 Fahrenheit. So what we have is this very strong offshore or directed pressure gradient with cold air aloft here in this region and very not cold air aloft over here. So this results in surface pressure, believe it or not, near the surface in this region, relatively lower pressure here. In fact, I bet you if I bring up the actual surface pressure, we'll probably be able to see that. Well, in this case, this is kind of interesting. So what we've got is this nice cold high pressure. Sorry, I may have said that backwards. Sorry, it's been a long week. But just to clarify, what I really intended to say is because there's cold air over the Great Basin, you get high pressure. Again, that's because cold air sinks, it accumulates, and so you have more accumulation of air mass in this region. And then you end up having, in this case, it's not so much that there's a low pressure system offshore, but it's less high pressure, if you will. So we'll call it a relative high. Actually, let me redraw this for clarity. So we have high pressure, and then we have what we'll call a relative high. That's not relative humidity, but it's just meant to indicate that it's lower pressure, even though it's still relatively high pressure. This is driving that offshore pressure gradient, which is very strong and is maximized across this portion of Southern California, leading to these offshore winds. As you see, that gradient strengthens overnight. So look at what we get as we get into the morning hours tomorrow. We really see that very strong offshore pressure gradient with some very cold air aloft. So as that happens, that's when the winds are going to peak tonight into tomorrow. This is the dangerous wind and fire weather period. But if we go back to the weather maps and we zoom in again on the southwest, this is what we see. Obviously, there's no precipitation on the map at all in California as you go through most of the week. We get into Friday, there's still nothing. We get towards Saturday, then something slightly more interesting starts to happen. I'm actually going to zoom back out a little bit to the western U.S. scale and then bring up the height anomalies. So we have that ridging. In fact, it actually might get quite warm. Thursday and Friday will not only be very dry and continued windy, but it will also be in the 70s to near 80 degrees in Southern California. So balmily warm. Again, not great fire conditions, especially following a major wind event. But then Friday comes, Saturday. And then Saturday comes, and initially this kind of looks like another uh-oh situation with yet another inside slider low pressure system. Is it going to do this and create another offshore wind event? Well, maybe. But right now, it looks like there's only about a 20-30% chance of that offshore wind event, because what might happen instead is this might finally, once again, the key word is retrograde, move southwestward against the mean flow. It might retrograde just far enough to the southwest. And we're talking the razor's edge here. So you can see in this particular model run, the low pressure system kind of does this and literally ends up just offshore of LA. If it does this instead, which is still possible, that's another extreme Santa Ana and extremely critical fire risk event. If it does this instead, that's actually a pretty significant rain event, and we might have to be worried about debris flows from heavy downpours from thunderstorms as soon as next weekend, so less than 7 days from now, in the recent fire areas. But if it does just this Goldilocks situation, we might be able to squeeze out some showers. Not heavy rain, not widespread, not fire season ending rain, but certainly something better than nothing without causing too much risk of debris flows. But we're just going to have to see. So the range of outcomes again for next weekend is it takes this path, it's another extremely critical fire risk event. It takes this trajectory, Goldilocks trajectory, you get some scattered showers. Doesn't end fire season, but at least we get the rain without the destruction. If it does something more like this, then we could actually see some pretty widespread thunderstorm activity with potentially very dangerous and potentially deadly debris flows given the proximity to these high-intensity fires and steep slopes. Yes, it's time to start talking about that risk because now it's potentially as little as about 5 to 6 days out. But we don't know right now. I think one interesting way to think about this is to look at the model ensembles here. And as you can see, so each of these iterations here, the E1, E2, E3, each of these is a different iteration or ensemble member of the same model. So I'm using the flagship European model, the single best weather model in the world at present. But when we use the ensemble, what we do is each of these individual iterations is exactly the same weather model, so it's not a different model, but it's the same model using slightly different initial conditions because we don't perfectly know what the initial state of the world is over every square inch of the globe throughout the full 3D atmosphere. So we intentionally we give the model our best estimate of the way things are right now. That's this very first line. And then we deliberately introduce random noise to it in each of these in slightly different directions, so different iterations of random noise. And the reason we do that is this gives us a better estimate of the plausible range of future outcomes, because in a chaotic atmosphere, in a complex, highly nonlinear fluid dynamical system, such as the Earth's atmosphere, tiny initial perturbations or uncertainties in the initial state of the atmosphere can cascade into significantly different outcomes. And we need no further evidence of that than just to look at how different some of these members are. And I'll take a look at ensemble member 9, for example. If you follow this across, it doesn't rain at all for the next 2 weeks in LA. 0.00 inches of precipitation. But if you take a look, for example, at ensemble member 5, this suggests that we have nearly a week straight of light precipitation next week in Southern California. That would be pretty nice. There's other members, for example. Take a look at ensemble member 27. This one is dry, completely dry until February 1st, but then has this random weather system out by February 1st. And then this one, ensemble number 31, looks like is dry also until February 3rd, but then has a really intense rain event out at the end of February. So this isn't to say that we can't say anything about the future. In fact, it's actually to say quite the opposite, because take a look at what we can tell. If you just squint a little bit, what you see is that there's a pretty good consensus in this green zone that somewhere between about January 25th and January 29th, there's likely to be some precipitation in the Los Angeles area. So even though the amounts vary considerably, could be anywhere from, at the high end, maybe as much as 3/4 of an inch of rain, or at the low end, essentially 0, or in some cases actually 0, most of these model members are suggesting 0.1, 0.2 inches or so, at least in this window. Some of them more, some of them less. That's not a lot of rain, but it's something, and also it's telling us that this isn't just that 1 or 2 members are extremely wet and the rest are dry, and so the average is a low number. It's telling us that actually most of these members are clustered between about 0.1 and 0.4 inches. And so what that means is that there's relatively high confidence that some rain will probably fall next weekend in Southern California. There's still uncertainty about the amount, and it's possible that the system could completely miss California to the east. In fact, I think all of these members that are completely white, or nearly so, take the inside slider track. All of the members that are blue, probably the ones that take the outside slider track. That could cause some risk of debris flows. But generally speaking, there's a pretty high confidence, according to the European Model Ensemble, of some showers next weekend in Southern California. Will they be beneficial? In most places, yes. Could they cause harm in form of debris flow? Possibly, because it looks like this particular system will be, and I'll take a look at this, I think I can actually show this if I change the parameter. Let me select a different model. I think I need to go to, for whatever reason, the American model is the only one that will show it on this website. Let me go back to Los Angeles and take a look at, yes, the CAPE matrix, so the convective available potential energy. Right now, it doesn't look all that extreme, but there are some members, again, in this range where it might rain, where there could be some instability in the atmosphere capable of generating convective downpours, so heavy showers and isolated thunderstorms. The concern would be that even if there are only scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms, and even if many areas remain dry next weekend, there could in fact be localized downpours that could cause debris flows. This has happened before. Keep in mind that the Montecito debris flow in January 2018 following the Thomas Fire burning in December 2017 was a fairly localized but very extreme downpour. So it doesn't need to be an extreme large-scale storm. In fact, many areas might even be dry in a foreseeable event where a thunderstorm downpour produces a destructive debris flow. So this is something to keep an eye on for next weekend. I would not be surprised to see flash flood watches issued for the fire burn areas next weekend if the current forecast holds, specifically for flash flood or debris flow risk within or downstream of these burn areas, even if most places in Southern California see little or no precipitation, because all it takes is one slow-moving downpour to cause that kind of problem. What is pretty clear is that 0 ensemble members generate enough rainfall to end fire season in Southern California. Many of them do generate enough rainfall to significantly mitigate it, but it won't be the end of fire season, particularly if wet conditions don't continue thereafter. And right now, it does look like it's likely this will be a one-off storm before Southern California returns to dry and potentially windy conditions as soon as a few days thereafter. In fact, looking at the same kind of chart, but for wind gusts, there's a couple of interesting things. One is we see this very high confidence in a very strong wind event tonight into tomorrow, right now, lots of high values, then a reprieve, and then next weekend, right around when it might rain, there could be another significant wind event either preceding or coinciding with some of this rain. So there actually could be another burst of severe fire weather before the rain arrives over the weekend. We'll have to see what happens. But there's another region of clustering, as you can see, of potentially strong gusty winds again. Now, as we go out towards February, you see that there's less clustering. There's a few individual members that have very strong wind events, and then there's other members that have almost no wind at all. So clearly we're getting into territory where there's a high dispersion among members. However, one thing I do notice is that there is at least some chance of significant offshore wind events redeveloping into February. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that we thread the needle and get some meaningful, widespread, but non-destructive precipitation in this window, because we don't get it here, we may have problems again with fires again by that point in time in a couple of weeks. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's check in on this fire here. It sounds like it's 3 acres now, so that is larger than it was. Forward progression stopped. So hopefully another good catch. Let's just take a look at the camera view here. You can still see it, but it doesn't look too bad. So again, I think we're going to keep getting these catches on most of the fires. My concern is what happens on just the 1 or 2 that we don't. Right now, it looks like once again there are no uncontrolled or unmitigated fires at the moment. So I'm going to switch back over to the camera view. You're going to see me again answer some questions that I'm certain have come through here. All right, so I'm going to go back to the beginning here. Take a look. It's a question about sprinklers, house sprinklers. Look, it can be a helpful fire risk mitigation, although in a lot of cases, the ones that really protect structures are literally mounted on the structures, like along the roof line or something, and on the roof itself. And here's the problem: it's a little bit of a collective versus an individual benefit conundrum, because remember all that criticism about how the hydrants ran dry during the Palisades fire and the Eaton fire, and how I've pointed out that it's probably true and it wasn't good, but also probably unavoidable, because we don't design municipal water systems to be able to have the throughput required by hundreds of individual fire engines pumping simultaneously to put out thousands of structure fires, nor the added burden of thousands upon thousands of waterline leaks as those structures burn and as the pipes within them break and start to leak. Of course the system ran out of water under those circumstances. How could it not have run out of water under those circumstances? That is just demand that is on the order supposedly of 5 to 10 times that of typical usage, and something like 3 to 5 times that of peak extreme usage under normal circumstances. Unless you specifically built an emergency fire flow system to accommodate all that extra water, there's no way you're going to be able to deal with it. And so herein lies the rub. If everybody in high fire risk zones had sprinklers on their houses and they all ran them at once as a major fire was approaching, well, guess what might happen is that fire crews might not have the hydrant pressure that they need to actually extinguish structure fires or brush fires in the vegetation near your house. It's a slightly less dramatic version of the problem when you have thousands of structures already burning and hundreds of engines already in place pumping, but you get the idea. If everybody turns on essentially unlimited spigots at their house to protect their house, and to be clear, in order to really mitigate the risk at structure level, you have to use quite a bit of water from those fire sprinklers that you might have installed. That then, imagine thousands or even tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people doing that at individual structure scale. Now all of a sudden, you have a new problem to deal with. So it can be an effective tool. It's usually more effective for isolated structures out there in the wilderness. It also presents less of a collective crisis in that situation, because often you have your own independent water source and you don't have 10,000 neighbors or 50 or 100,000 neighbors doing the same thing. So, it's tricky, right? And there have been admonitions at times that people, who are using garden hoses in an ad hoc way to protect their homes, maybe should reconsider in some cases because of the burden on the water supply. I think that's often going to be less of an issue, since there usually aren't tens of thousands of people doing that. And also, a single garden hose is not using as much water as a whole structure sprinkler system would either. So, I think if you're, it's tough. I'm not a firefighting expert in that sense, nor am I a municipal water systems engineer, so maybe somebody has clearer answers than I, but generally speaking, that's how I think about it. If everybody turned the sprinklers, fire sprinklers on at their own personal home, if thousands of people do it, you might start to have water supply issues, just as we did on the Palisades and Eaton fires. But on the other hand, at the margins, it can be a helpful tool. Folks commenting that they can hear the wind blowing and it's picking up. That's right in line with forecasts. They're going to continue to accelerate through the night, and the humidity will drop to really low levels. There's a couple of comments. Yes, there have been individual model runs that are actually pretty concerning regarding potential debris flow risk next weekend in Southern California. The worst thing we could see, really, is thunderstorms or convective downpours. That's the big thing that worries me, because it's not so much the total amount of rain that matters for debris flow risk. It matters somewhat, but it's more the intensity, the rate at which it falls over 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour. So it's those short, sharp downpours that really cause the most dangerous debris flows. In the case of the Montecito debris flows in January 2018, the mountains, the burned area immediately above Montecito, which experienced such a deadly and catastrophic event thereafter, saw essentially an inch of rain in just a few minutes, which is an almost unbelievable amount of water. But that can happen occasionally in the mountains of Southern California in a convective downburst. So that's what I hope we don't see. There is at least a slight chance of convective downbursts next weekend, so we're going to have to see what happens. And by downbursts, technically, meteorologically, I actually mean cloud bursts, because a downburst actually has to do with wind, which is not necessarily the hazard I'm concerned about. It more has to do with those downpours. And sometimes, and this could be the kind of system that brings scattered heavy showers and thunderstorms, including some debris flows to some locations, and then these other areas completely dry, because convective precipitation is often spotty. It can be heavy, but it often isn't contiguous. And if you get mist, well, locally, your fire risk is just as high as it was before. So it's not exactly the weak atmospheric river that I think would be the ideal weather right now. You know, a low end atmospheric river would do wonders for Southern California right now. A high end one would cause destruction from debris flows, but a low end atmospheric river, everyone gets light to locally moderate rain would be the best case. There's absolutely no indication of something like that on the horizon, unfortunately. Although there is a real chance of rain next weekend, it will be in the less contiguous but more intense shower variety if it happens, which is a mixed bag, a mixed blessing for sure. Yes, actually, I hadn't even seen this comment from Chris, but that's more or less my point. Um, Regarding fire suppression sprinklers, they certainly have their use cases, and they're actually really effective for individual structure fires. And to a certain extent, the exterior sprinklers can be effective in isolated structure settings from a wildland fire perspective. But if everybody does it in an urban area, you don't have enough water. You lose the pressure, and then everybody loses. Then nobody wins. So it's lose-lose at that point. The comment from Tom: San Diego County allows nighttime water drops on wildfires outside city limits under an agreement with City of San Diego. It's been using this practice for a past year. I don't doubt that's true. We know that happens in LA County because we've seen on some of these live streams those water dropping helicopters at night. But the problem is they will allow it, but still aviation safety dictates. And once wind speeds get gusting about 30 to 40 miles an hour, they will not let those helicopters fly. For safety reasons, for the sake of the pilot and people on the ground, since nobody wants a crash, but also because even if there's no crash, the efficacy of water drops approaches zero under 40, 50 plus mile an hour winds because a lot of the water actually evaporates before it gets to the ground. So remember that helicopters are not generally dropping retardant, they're dropping actual water. One of the reasons why there's a difference is when the slurry bombers, the fixed-wing aircraft that drop retardant, it's not just water. It's bright red or pink because there are clay-like compounds in it that inhibit its evaporation on the way to the ground and cause it to stick to surfaces a little more. So that's one reason why it's used in that way. But helicopters, including the night-dropping ones, would be dropping water only, which has a tendency in an extreme... Again, the humidity will be like 1 to 5% with 50 plus mile an hour winds. There's a question about whether the helicopters could safely fly under those conditions, but there's also a question that even if they could, whether there'd be any point in dropping that water because most of it is just going to evaporate or dissipate over a very broad area before hitting the ground. So again, we lose that capacity under very strong wind conditions, both because of aviation safety concerns and also just because you can't really achieve the drops successfully in the way you want under those conditions either. It's a comment that smells like smoke in West Adams, west of downtown LA. It could be from one of the small fires that's been burning this evening that are under control at the moment, or it could just be, as I mentioned, it could be ash. So you might be smelling ash from the Eaton fire, as much as I hate to say it. There's a question about wanting a reference for the 2017 debris flow in Montecito. I can dig something up. It's not something I can do right now. It's hard for me to search while I've got all these windows open. But you can. I'm trying to think of. I have a name in mind, and I'm blanking on her name right now. The author of the paper I would refer you to. I can come back to that later next time. Resources for Meteorology 101. The COMET program through NCAR-UCAR is a digital program. It's free. You do have to enroll in it, but it's self-paced. It's really good. So that's probably the best thing that I can think of. So the COMET program. That's what I would recommend. Would undergrounding power lines reduce risk significantly? It sure can in terms of the risk of power line ignited fires, and I know that utilities are doing this in some high risk corridors, but it turns out that it is almost ludicrously expensive. Now, here's the thing though, any smart entity or person is always thinking about costs versus benefits. So even if the costs are high, if the benefits are also high, then it makes sense to do it. And I think this is why we're starting to see it in specific high risk corridors where we get strong winds frequently, but not everywhere. So to be for perfect safety, yes, it probably would be better to have them underground. Although, by the way, that does increase risks during flood events, so there is some trade-off there. But generally, yes, it probably would reduce the risk of fires. There's some movement toward it. We probably will not see undergrounding of all the lines, though, because it would cost trillions and trillions of dollars to do it everywhere. We'll probably see it as a gradual process, beginning first in the high-risk areas and perhaps also in new subdivisions where they don't yet have lines in and they're building from scratch. The main costs involved, by the way, are digging up existing infrastructure and right-of-ways. So it's not like it's that expensive to do it in the first place, but to redo the infrastructure from above ground to below ground is where the costs balloon. So I think that's the real challenge there. Uh, when's it expected to peak? Somewhere between probably 2 or 3 at midnight and 10 a.m. tomorrow, depending on where you are. Maybe later in the day as you go down towards San Diego County. That's why the extremely critical risk is later into tomorrow down south. Question: what do you think about the brush fire in Griffith Park earlier? Any chance it could get crazy again in Hollywood? I mean, if there's a new fire, sure, once the winds pick up, it could. I doubt that one's going to go anywhere. The LAFD's already got crews on it, and I'm guessing they're going to leave at least one crew on it through the entire night. Just so that if anything does pop back up, they literally have somebody standing there watching it, and so they can put water on it quickly. So I would be more worried again about new fires that break out in the overnight hours. That's I think going to be the number one concern in cases like this. Let's see here. I'm actually just trying to get a link to the comment. It's actually, I guess it's called. They may have changed the name to MetEd, but here I actually have the link right here. So I'll just post it in the chat for those interested here. There you go. Okay, so there's a comment from Mark that there might be a new fire, so I'll check that out. That's way out by Victorville, up in the high desert. Yeah. So let's see. There is significant fire risk in the high desert right now. So there's more vegetation than usual growth this year. So there's more grass up there, and there are strong winds and dry weather. So not immediately a huge concern compared to some other places, given the relative sparsity of vegetation, but also not a complete. There is some fire risk in the high desert tonight in places where there's contiguous vegetation. Let's just put it that way, and that there are such places in proximity to populated areas up there too. So although the risk isn't as extreme as elsewhere, it does exist even up into the high desert under conditions like this, especially given how much vegetation growth we had again from those 2 consecutive really wet winters. Because there, if there's any vegetation at all, what's filling in the gaps between the sparse scrub and the Joshua trees is grass. And it is the grass that would carry that kind of fire across multiple acres, because generally those desert ecosystems, in most places, not universally, so there's riparian areas that have more contiguous vegetation, there's higher elevation zones and meadows that have more contiguous vegetation, but generally speaking, that's going to be carried by largely invasive grasses, which has become a real problem in some of these areas for sure. All right, well, I'll do my quick little roundup, see if I have any more. I'm not seeing anything alarming on the satellite right now, so that's consistent with watch duty showing no large, fast-moving fires at this time. I may end this session a little bit on the earlier side because there's a possibility that I will end up returning again tonight. So this might not be the last session of the night. I just have a feeling that some things may pop up in the next few hours. If that happens, and if there's something significant, so I won't come back for these 1 or 2 acre things that get stopped within the first 10 or 15 minutes, but anything that gets beyond that, I will probably return later tonight. My plan is to be on with a live session tomorrow morning, pretty early. Well, actually, let me see. Yeah, probably around 9 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow. So I don't have that officially scheduled yet, but you're hearing it here first. It will probably be 9 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow. I do have a meeting at 8 a.m., so I won't be able to be on that early. Hopefully, I don't have much to talk about. Hopefully, I don't have to pop back on later tonight because something gets out of hand. But we'll see what happens. And there is a real risk of dangerous, fast-moving fires in the overnight hours. It's a good night to be prepared, to stay vigilant, don't spark any fires yourself. And this may not be the last you see of me tonight. So for now, if there are no other questions, I will probably sign off for now, with the caveat that if I come back later, it will be in a new session, which I'll announce via social media, as always. And also, again, I encourage everybody who's watching tonight to subscribe to the channel. I know a lot of people have in recent days, so thanks for that. But the main reason I suggested is that so you're able to be notified, if you turn notifications on, when I start these live sessions at short notice. So you can turn notifications on so you don't get caught by surprise when I do pop online on pretty short notice. So as always, I strongly encourage people to subscribe and also to sign up for notifications. That doesn't happen automatically. It's an additional step. So thanks everybody. Stay safe out there. My hope for any number of reasons is that I don't have to schedule another live session tonight, but I will if conditions warrant and if a large, 1 or more large fast-moving fires do break out. There are none right now. But given that conditions will worsen overnight, that could change. Tomorrow will be tricky as well. So stay safe out there. Maybe see you later tonight. Otherwise, tomorrow morning, probably at 9 a.m. Pacific.